Okay, so let me hmm. So let me just start sharing my screen. Okay. Hmm. So I hope my screen is visible. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Okay. So as of now, we have already discussed all the things related to like before we actually start working on the lab sessions. It was important for us to understand why do we need a containerized environment so that we can deploy our services on any higher environments, right? So, with respect to real-time use cases as well, there are a lot of scenarios when you're working in DevOps where you have to, troubleshoot things related to uh, understanding the container logs. There are a lot of things. Okay. So what today's agenda would be, first of all, we will try to understand what is exactly a development workflow, right? So in short, like as I already explained, like what is DevOps? It's a bridge between the development team and the operation teams. We usually, get to know these things like the DevOps is a kind of uh, technology where you have to collaborate with the development team and the things. But what exactly would be the roles and responsibility that we will discuss today? Few of the things like we will understand like what exactly we call it as logs. What are the real-time debugging things which we have to work on? So we will go step by step again. But yeah, today's session would be mostly on the hands-on part. That means we will execute the commands. We will try to set up some containers. We will try to change some of the ports. Uh, then how to do a sanity testing within the containers. How to identify if there is some unwanted, uh, bugs or if there is any vulnerabilities within the container scan. So we'll understand a little bit on that part today. Okay. So let's start our today's session. Hopefully, we have already covered all the basic things we needed on our last session, right? So just I would like to simply explain this part little bit, what is image versus what is container. Okay. So I'll take one use case. Okay, just let me take, let's say, I have, yeah. So let's say this is my Node.js application. Okay. So again, yeah, and one more thing I would just like to update. So right now, all our sessions we are directly uploading on the YouTube, and I'm assuming you all have the playlist already available. So if you just click on the playlist, you will get all the daily recorded sessions. But since as I already discussed, few of our projects are live projects. It means we have some of the secrets, we have our backend infrastructure with respect to our services. So we just don't want to expose these things directly on any public domain. Like YouTube is anyway, we don't want to directly expose those things on the YouTube. So that's the reason for all the projects we have a separate Google Drive link. So obviously, when we are good in understanding Docker, Kubernetes, and when we are going for our actual projects, right, along with our Jenkins, Kubernetes, then your Grafana, Prometheus, and all these things. So obviously, at that time, we have to understand. We are not directly going to deploy these projects, and the videos won't be available in the YouTube. So in that case, we will share separately these projects in this Google Drive link. Okay. So from today till the Kubernetes session, that is going to 15 to 16th session, we will directly upload the sessions on YouTube, right? And once we are done with Kubernetes, like once we have the 15th session, from 16th session onwards, it's going to be on the Google Drive. It won't be there in the YouTube due to the security reason. We don't, as I said, we don't want to expose these things in any public domain. Okay. Yeah. So, um, hmm. So let's say now I have this Node.js application. Okay. Once I have this Node.js application, this is going to be the same application. I'm just explaining the project architecture so that we can move forward in the lab sessions. So let's say I have this Node.js application. Now, if I obviously we have the development team, right? Okay. So let's say this is the requirement from the development team. Okay. They're actively working on some features. And once they're happy with their changes, like obviously they're going to write the code. And once we get the code, we have our source code repository in a version control system where we're actually maintaining our codes. Yeah, anyone is raised hand, I think. Any questions in between? Or if you're in unmute. Hmm. And we're not directly uploading in the Google Drive because again, it's difficult to maintain the different versions for different batches, right? We have a lot of different other things also going in parallel. So that's the reason we are directly uploading the things. But for project, since it's a secret credentials, we don't want to expose. So that's the reason it's there in the Google Drive. So once we're done with the sessions, you will get the access to this Google Drive links. So you can directly get those things there. So yeah, okay. So if you see this architecture now, right? So obviously the development team, they were actively work on the application. Once they have the application source code, they are going to maintain the version control in the GitHub repository, right? And once we have our version, once we have our versioning, the next step would be we have to write a template, and this template, what we call it as Docker file. Okay. So this is what we'll understand today, how to write a Docker file. And once we write a Docker file, right? Again, this Docker file, anyway, it's going to be available. So this is not the correct diagram, I would say. This is something, it has all the application level code. We should have our source code along with the dependencies and also the OS level template, what we need. So this Docker file will be available in the root directory for your project. And once you write the Docker file, then from the GitHub itself, we have the source code along with the Docker file. Then we are going to create a container, right? So it's going to be my Docker container. And we have somewhere what we call it as a registry. So Docker registry, that what I was explaining, that's basically where you're going to get all the Docker images. So I would say this is my registry, or you can say Docker Hub. This is where we are going to maintain all our image Docker images. Okay. So once I again this thing like to get the image and all. So obviously this image, once we get the image, then we are directly going to deploy this our Docker container. So again, this Docker Hub, we are going to pull this image to this Docker file, right? In Docker file, we have three things. First, we should have our source code, right? Where exactly is our source code? So I'll just say this is going to be my source code. Okay. Then I should have my dependency, right? And once I have the dependency, the last stage is OS template. Or you can say the base image. That is the actual name. So I'll say base image. What is this base image? I'll explain now. This base image is nothing but the OS level template, what we need. For example, if it's a Node.js application, then I'm going to pull a Node.js base image from the Docker Hub. If it's a Python application, I'm going to pull a Python image. If it's a Golang application, I'll just pull a Golang image. So as per the requirement, as per the project requirement, we have to get the operating system layer, right? So that's what we are going to pull from the Docker Hub, from this Docker registry. So in Docker registry, since it's a Node.js application, I'm going to pull a Node.js image from the Docker registry. Okay. So it's a very simple architecture. Like this is the workflow. So let's do this lab setup directly on our system itself. So we have already, we already have this Ubuntu system that is currently on our AWS instance. We are running this, right? So once I get this requirement, the next step would be I have to clone this application source code. Because if you see here, when you're working in your organization, obviously you have some version control where you are maintaining all the source code, right? So same thing, if you see here, this is the URL, git clone, this is the git command. I am just cloning my all the source code available in this directory. So even if I just want to get this, okay, I'll just say this is my application source code. So this is basically a very simple application. I mean, it's a very basic level of application. We are mostly using JavaScript. Okay. So if you see the source code, I mean, I'm assuming if some of you are already from the development background, maybe you are easily able to get the things. But again, just to make sure that we all understand the things on a same level, so I'm trying to explain a little bit on the code base as well. Okay. So mostly in the development cycle, like it's going to be something like, yeah, if you see here, the first we have these three requirements. That is, when you're going to write a Docker file, you should have your source code and you should have the dependency for your application, right? So let's just understand the step by step how you should architect your Docker file. Okay. So I'm just referencing this again over here. Okay. So first of all, we have to understand what we call it as source code, right? Source. Okay. Let me do one thing. Let me just get this back. I'll just do it here. Hmm. So when I say source code, right? So source code basically means you should have, okay. So source code basically means you should have all the codes available. That means all the libraries and all the modules which you need as a feature so that you can uh, design or you can architect the application layers, right? So this is something, I mean, as a DevOps engineer, what we have to do, this is what we call it as the collaboration. That means in DevOps, as I was explaining on the previous sessions as well, as a DevOps, you have to actively collaborate with the development team. So you can simply imagine this is my Docker container is nothing, but it's just a environment. You can say like it's a dev environment, right? That is, you are going to deploy your applications on this standalone server. So currently I'm on this Ubuntu instance, right? So you can say like this is my development server. Now I want to deploy this Docker container in this environment, right? So if you want to deploy this environment, this is the operation work, like related things like your instance CPU, memory, and all the infra related stuffs. That is part of the operation teams. But when it comes to the development part, so you have to understand what is the source code, what is the dependency, right? So what you have to do, you have to reach out to the right uh, team. Let's say they're actively working on, let's say they're working on the backend service, right? You are going to create a backend Docker file so that you can deploy that application as a standalone container, right? So what you have to do, you have to reach out to the development team. You have to ask them the right question. So by right question, what I mean is you have to ask them, this is the repository. So in this repository, can you explain how I can test this application on my local? Okay, so this part, what you have to do, obviously, they will help you in explaining these things. They will definitely help you in understand like, okay, so source code, we have all the source code available in this directory called SRC. SRC means source directory, right? This is my SRC directory. So in this SRC directory, if I just navigate to this directory, I have my static, roots, and persistent. These are some of the independent libraries which has the modules and what they have they have been working on. So similarly, they will explain this is my index.js file, and here we have forwarded the port. So if my app is listening on port 3000. So this kind of information they will help you in understanding, right? This is going to be the first thing. Like the first thing would be understanding what is the source code. Okay. Once we know what is the source code, then obviously the next step would be, because we have to expose this port so that I can expose the same thing in my container environment as well, right? So you have to understand what is the port number for your application. So in this case, my port number is 3000, correct? So this is what I can see. It is currently in the src/index.js. This is the path. Again, I repeat, uh, when you're working in DevOps, it's not necessary that you have to understand the code base. Like you don't have to understand this logics, what all things we are working on. The only thing what we are interested is, we are interested in understanding the things, the terms which I am going to explain over here. Like the first thing is, where is my source code? What is the port number? Then what else we need? We need, if you see here, source code we already have. This is the source code. Port number is necessary to expose the port to the outside, so that you can test it from the browser or for the end user. And then you need the dependency packages. Okay. So we know that in our this application, we call it as getting started application. We have the source code over here in the src directory. Now we have something we call it as package.json file. So again, this is for your JavaScript applications. Like if you are working on Node.js, so you will have something we call it as package.json file. In this package.json file, we have all the dependencies needed for my application. Similarly, if you're working on a Python-based application, you have a file we call it as requirements.txt file. So in that file, you will have all the dependencies needed for your Python application, right? Let's say instead of getting started, like this is a Node.js application, right? So it's a Node.js application. So we know in src directory, we have all the source code, and we are going to get this information from the development team. Similarly, if you're working on a Python application, again, you have to collaborate with the the development team. You have to ask them the right question, that where do we have this source code? So they will say like, okay, we have a directory called it as test directory. In this test directory, we have some submodules. In these submodules, we have these are the codes. So this is basically all my source code, like that. So they will explain you in understanding. This is where we have all the application level source code, right? Similarly, instead of package.json file, we will have something called as requirements.txt file. That is for your Python application. Again, for a Golang application, you will have something called as go.mod. So that is basically all the modules, Golang modules, which they are working on. Same case, even it goes for a Java-based application, or it could be a Ruby-based application. If it's a Ruby application, we will have something called as gem file. So there are a lot of different use cases. So I'm not saying like you don't need you don't need a knowledge on programming, but yeah, at least you should understand how to collaborate with the development team and how to ask the right questions. The thing is, where is the source code and what is the dependency? Okay. Now we have the source code again. We have the source code. We have the port number. Now the next thing is the dependencies, right? So the dependency would be, we know that is my package.json file, right? So I'll say package.json. This is my dependency file. So again, you don't need to be, we are not assuming that you should know what is this package.json file, how to write this package.json file. But on a high level, you should understand that, okay, I can see like this is the app version, right? And then I can see these are the dependencies, even it is highlighted here. So we are using Express as a framework for this application. The version should be more than 4.18.2. This will help you in the debugging. So let's say your container is breaking, right? Or maybe you're using some different versions, so that you can, if you want to debug the things, then you can easily understand like what level of versions you are using. So let's say your application currently you are using, let's say, some lower version, lower than 4, like it's 3.9 dot something, and you are using the Express version as 4.18.2. So again, this is not something for the DevOps team. This is something which a development team, they will take care. You don't have to maintain this package.json file of the source code. It's they're only going to maintain, but it's always a good practice to at least understand on a very high level what is happening inside the code base, right? So here, if you see, like these are the versions, what you need to understand, and mostly what are the dev dependencies, like what are the dependent, like node, mon, jest. These are some of the dev dependencies which is needed so that you can start your application. Okay. So yeah, if I come back to this now we have this dependency, we have the source code, we know what is the port number, what else we need. So if I just come back, we have the dependencies and all these things. Now the last step would be what we call it as package manager. For any programming language, we have something we call it as package manager. Okay. So let me say package manager. Yeah. So for a Node.js application, again, we have a package manager, right? So usually we have npm. npm is a package manager for a Node.js application, or yarn. So these are the package managers. So again, these package managers by default, whenever you are going to execute any npm command, okay. So again, these things will be explained by the development team. They will help you in understanding, like if you want to test this application on your local, right? Like this is my application. Instead of deploying this application as a container, first of all, you have to understand, right, how to deploy this application directly on a local host on your local server. So that is what, if you want to directly deploy this application, you have to use a package manager. And if you see here, they are using Yarn as a package manager, right? So similarly, if you want, you can also deploy this application as npm package manager. So if you deploy this as an npm package manager, it will be package log.json file, right? Whenever you are going to execute some npm install or npm init command, so it will directly ask you to actually execute these commands. So for instance, if I just need to show you this repository, this is like a full stack application. Okay. So if you see here in this README file, usually you're going to get this kind of README file, right? You'll get this README file. So they will give you all these instructions. Like you have to execute this command. If you see npm install, this is for installing all the required dependencies. Then how to set up the database for your local. All these things, it will already be available for your README file so that you can understand and you can execute these commands manually, right? If you see npm run dev, so once you execute this command npm install, it will automatically install all the dependencies needed for your application, which is there in your package.json file. Similarly, if you say yarn install, instead of npm, if you say yarn install, it will again install all the packages. So either you can use npm or you can use yarn as a package manager so that you can build all the dev dependencies, all the dependencies needed to deploy your application. Okay. So yeah, that is basically, I'm just removing this part because this is a different project which we will deploy by the end of our bootcamp. But yeah, usually you will get all these things. You will, your development team, they will definitely help you in setting this up so that you can test this application on your local before you actually, go for this Dockerfile or other things. Okay, so now we know what is a package manager as well. I mean, based on this package manager only, we are going to, deploy our application. Okay. Now, what should be the next step? The next step is we know npm is a package manager, right? So in npm itself, we are having two commands basically. One is npm init. Either I would say npm install or npm I. It will simply install all the dev dependencies. And similarly, I will have another command, we call it as npm run, or we call it as npm start. So these commands you will get from the development team. They will help you, they will give you these commands, whether you need to run npm run or you need npm start. So these commands you will easily get from the development team. Okay. So yeah, this is basically, these are the commands you need so that you can start your development server. And once you execute this command npm run or npm start, it will automatically start forwarding your request to the port number. The port number is 3000. And when you're just directly going in the browser and you are saying localhost colon 3000, you should be able to see the front end for your application. That's it. This is what we call it as local testing, like how you are doing the testing on your local. So even the development workflow, mostly what happens when they are doing the testing, right? The development team, what they will do, they will always do the testing on their local, right? They will test the application on their local system. Once they are happy with the changes, now they are going to push this to this GitHub repository. Okay. As a DevOps engineer, your requirement would be, once you have all the source code available, once it is completely tested from the development end, you can clone the application and now you can start writing the Docker file. Okay. So this is what we are doing in this project as well. The lab one session, that is first you have to clone the application. This is the URL. So I'm just going it back. So I'll just clone this application. You just have to copy this command. Okay. Then let me connect back. Hmm. So I'll just execute this command. So by default, Git should already be installed. Because it's an Ubuntu instance, so it should have the Git installed. Yeah, it's 2.43.0. That's fine. So I'll just say git clone. Okay. Once I execute this command, I'm able to clone all the application. Basically it's already there in a remote repository. This is my GitHub repository. So I'm able to clone the application on my local. So if I do ls, I should see my application on my local, right? Now I'm just going to change the directory. Okay. So I should see, yeah. So I should see all the files and directories which are available there in my GitHub repository is already available on my local as well, right? For example, if you see the package.json file, src directory, yarn.log. So all these files which are available in my remote repository on my GitHub repository is now available on my local. Okay. So now it comes the next step. That is, once we have all the requirements from the development team, we know where is my source code. My source code is in the src directory. We know this is the dependency, package.json file is the dependency needed for my application. We also know that our application port is we have exposed the port on port 3000, right? So we have all this information. So you can also, the next step is, yeah, if you see the view, the content clone, you can do an ls, you will see this kind of architecture. So by default, there is something called as tree. So if I just install this is just for some more, you can just see the things in this folder. Yeah. So this is how the entire architecture looks like. This is your package.json file. In this specification, you have two modules called persistence, roots. These are all the submodules what they have created, the JavaScript files, right? This is the source code. This is where we have all the application source code available. So you can get all the source code over here, right? These are React based uh, modules what they have created. And this is my dependency files. So it has total 11 directories and 40 files. Okay. Now the next step would be we have to build the apps image, right? So we have to build the image that is basically our Docker image. Okay. So if you want to build the image, then obviously, first of all, we have to write a Docker file. And we are going to get this Docker file. Okay. We are going to get this Docker file based on this information, right? We have to understand, first of all, we have to pull the image. This is going to be the first step. So just what I will do, let me just eliminate this part and I'm going to write down here itself. Just say this is my image. This is my Docker image. Okay. This is my Docker image. And to build this Docker image, the first thing I need is the first thing I need is my base image. So let's understand now what exactly this base image is. So I'll just go to this Docker Hub. Okay. So this is my Docker Hub. I'll have to sign in. Okay. Yeah. So, um, hmm. So what I will say, since it's a Node.js application, so I'll just say Node.js. You can just directly search over here. Okay. So I'll say Node will by default be the latest official Node.js image. So if you just click on it, okay, it's official Node.js image. It has 1 billion plus downloads already, right? So this is basically the official Node.js image, and it's already maintained by the community as well. So if you see supported tags and respective Dockerfile links, so you will get all the latest image tags, which are tags simply means the versions, because again, it's a community managed, right? It's an open source. So it means every day there are a lot of bug fixes, there are a lot of changes what communities they are actively working on. So right now, if you see, this is the latest version 22 Alpine.19. This is the latest tag. So by tag, what I mean is, um, hmm, if you want to pull this image, so you have to simply execute this command, docker pull node. If you remember the Docker architecture when I was explaining over here, right? In this Docker architecture, when I was explaining, this is the registry. This is my Docker Hub registry. So let's say I'm going to build a Docker file. So when you are going to build a Docker file, obviously you have to pull the image, right? So using docker pull command, you are going to get the image. For example, if you see this is the Python image, right? So if it's a Node.js application, you have to pull the Node.js image. Why we are pulling the Node.js image? The Node.js image has all the operating system level resources needed to start this application on your in your container. Because container, what exactly is container? Container is similar to a virtual machine. The only difference is in the container, you don't have to install the operating system. Instead of installing the operating system manually, you can directly pull the images from the Docker Hub, right? Once you pull the image, it already has all the essentials needed to start your container. Okay, so that is what we call it as base image. Okay, and the same thing also we have explained here in this documentation. Like if you scroll down a little bit, creating an image from Dockerfile. So we have given a Dockerfile is used to create a Docker image, right? And it includes various instructions. It's just like a text file, right? It's just like a text file, and in the text file we have all the all sort of instructions we have needed to start our application inside a container. So the first step would be you have to understand what we call it as base image, right? So this, if you see here, it specifies the base image from which our Docker image is built. So since it's a Node.js application, so even when you're working for any application in your organization, if it's a Python, Golang, so what you have to do, simply you have to go to the official Docker Hub. If it's a Python application, you have to search here called Python. You will get the image, right? Now the next step would be, once you get this image, you will use this command, right? Docker pull node. This is something if you're doing the things manually. I mean, you're just cloning the image locally. So let me show you. Just copy this command, docker pull node. And if I just directly execute this command over here, okay. So it will say, if you see, it's pulling the image from the Docker Hub registry on my local, correct? But this is not something what we need in our Dockerfile. In Dockerfile, we have to explicitly mention like what is my operating system, uh, where exactly I have the source code, what port number we are exposing. All these things we have to manually explain the things in our Dockerfile, right? So for that reason, if you want to build a Docker image, because this is my Docker image, right? Once I build the Docker image, then only I'm going to create a container. This is the Docker container. So the first thing is we have to get a base image. Let me write it somewhere here. Okay. The that is basically my base image, or you can simply say like my base operating system. What operating system I need? So this is my node image, right? So this is my Node.js image, which I'm going to pull from Docker Hub along with the latest tag. What should be the tag? Now, what exactly I mean by tag? So obviously, if you see here in the Node.js official image, there are a lot of tags available so that you can highlight this in your Docker file. So if you see 22 alpine.19, then 22.6, then 22.6.0, there are a lot of different versions which are available, right? So similarly, if I just official go to Node.js latest versions, if I just actually go over here, this is the official Node.js image repository. So currently, if you see, the latest version is 22.6.0. This is the latest version which is available currently, right? And the same thing if you see here, 22. This is the latest Node.js version which is available. So obviously what you have to make sure is whenever you're going to write a Docker file, you have to make sure that if your development team, like for example, in this application, um, I think they are using some, let me see in the Docker file. Yeah, they are using Node 18. It means they are using Node.js 18 version, right? They are not using the latest version, 22 version. In your organization, obviously, if they are actively working on the product, obviously it will be the latest version, 22, but 22 version only. But let's say it's an old, it's not, I mean, you guys are not maintaining actively your application source code and they are working on a specific version, or let's say the development team, they are actively working on a specific version of Node.js, like 16, 17, 18, any specific version, then even in that case, you have to use that specific version. So for instance, if you see 18, Node 18 Alpine, correct? So you can use any of these tags, okay? You can use any of these tags so that you can pull the Node.js image. If you are not mentioning this, okay, if you are not explicitly mentioning that no, you don't want to pull a specific version. So for example, if I say here latest, so it will automatically install the latest version. That means 22 version. But if I don't want to explicitly mention, then I have to write this here that I need Node.js 18 version because my application source code, right? My application source code is at present with respect to Node.js 18 version. It's not supporting the Node.js 22 version. If you're installing Node.js 22 and your application source code is Node.js 18, then it will simply break your application. You'll get a lot of errors. Okay. Yeah, so you should have your base image. So let's write this Docker file now. Okay. So once you have this, you can simply create a Docker file. So either you can use this touch command or you can simply use some editor like Vim editor. So what I'll do, I'll just simply uh, let me create a file. I call it as Docker file. Okay. So I'm going to create a file called as Docker file. The D should be uppercase. Okay, this is the standard practice. You should write it a Dockerfile. So once I execute, then I have to insert. You just have to click I, that is what we call it as insert when you're inside the terminal. Okay. Then I'm just going to copy this and I'll explain what this code basically is. Okay. So now if you see, let me come back to this. Okay. So this is what we call it as base image from. From means it's going to, I mean, it's asking what is your operating system template from where we are going to set up the operating system resources for my containers. Because in containers, we don't have our own operating system, right? So that definitely we need an operating system along with all the necessary dependencies for a Node.js application. So as I mentioned, this application, getting started application, we are using Node.js 18. So that's the reason we are using 18 Alpine. Okay. So if you see here, this is the image, Node.js, node, you can simply say node. This is the name of the image, node, colon, tag. What tag? Tag means what version you are using. So I'm using 18 Alpine. Okay. So this is available here, node 18 Alpine. This is my OS level image. Once I have this base image, this is also what we call it as base image. Okay. So the first step you should always remember, the first step will always be what is your base image. This is where we actually start writing our Docker file. So same thing I have explained here, base image from which our Docker image is built. For example, if you're using Ubuntu, then you can say Ubuntu 20.04 like that. So since it's a Node.js application, we are using node colon, what is the version or what is the Node.js version we are using. Okay, this is the first step. Now the next step is if you see working directory. Working directory means, yeah. So working directory means if you see slash app. So slash app basically means this is going to be your present working directory inside the container. Okay. So I repeat, in the container, like when we create a container, because ultimately what we are doing, we are creating a Docker file. From Docker file, we are going to create a Docker image, and from Docker image, we are going to create a container. So this Docker file is like a template. It's like a blueprint for your uh, Docker container architecture. right? Like how it's going to look like when you spin up a container. So similarly, once you create the container, I will even show you what exactly I mean by this slash app. Just for the time being, just understand that working directory means we are going to set up a present working directory. In this directory only, we will have all the essentials needed to start my container. Okay. And this is what we have explained here as well, working directory. So set the working directory within the container. This is the important within the container. It's going to be inside the container. It's not going to be your local host. Okay, where your application will be placed. So this is where we will have our application, and this is the standard practice how we write working directory. So it's going to be work dir colon space slash app. So it could be anything. You can say XYZ, any random name you can give. So it's just I mean anything you can give. That's fine. So we have given the name of the directory as slash app. Okay. Now once we set the working directory, the next step would be what we are doing, we are copying, if you see the two dots here, right? The first dot and the second dot. So we are basically copying all the files from my current working directory. So this current working directory, the first dot, it means my present working directory. From my, so yeah, let me do one thing. I think that will be easy for you all to understand. Let me say, just a sec, I think, yeah, we come out of this. Hmm. If I do ls, okay, this is my Docker file. So let me do a cat for this Docker file. So we'll be able to understand these things a little bit more if you're learning this Docker for the first time. If you already know, then yeah, maybe you're already aware of, but yeah, we have the base image, we have the working directory. Now, if you see this copy command, right, this is where basically I'm copying all my files from my current working directory. So current working directory means if I say pwd, so this is my current working directory /home/ubuntu /getting started. If I do ls, so I have these files, correct? So this is what we mean. So we are basically going to copy all these files. That means all these files we are going to copy from my present working directory to the container. So what is my present working directory for the container? It is /app. It means when I'm going to spin up a container, I'm directly going inside this directory called /app. And inside this directory, I'm going to have all these files. Okay, so it's like you are mapping the things from your local to the container. Okay. So once we have all these files available, all these files, once we have available from my present working directory to the /app directory inside the container, next step would be we have to install all the dependencies. So this is what I was explaining, yarn install. So if you again just go back to this one, so you should know like what is the package manager, what in all these things, right? So if you see here, the dependency packages, so we have the source code available. So yes, we have the source code, this src. I have my source code available in my container in the /app directory, correct? Once I have the source code, now I also have the package.json file, but I have to build this image, right? Like how we are doing this on the local. In the local as well, you have to install npm init command, like npm install. Or if you are using yarn as a package manager, then yarn install. So the similar thing what we are doing inside the container as well. We are, if you say this command run, run means we are whenever you're going to execute any Linux command, so you will use run as an operation. So same thing I have again explained here as well. What is this run command? To execute commands within the container. Inside the container, if you want to execute any commands, you will use this operation called run. Okay. So yeah, I'm saying yarn install to install all the packages. And if you see this flag -- production, so this is something just to give a flag for your application, whether you're building the application for your development environment, for production, or for local testing. So this is just a flag. You can, even if you want, you can ignore this part. Doesn't matter if it's just a flag, or you can say it's just like a it's like a comment. It's not specific to anything. So even if you ignore this part, that is fine. Even if you use --dev, --int, --prod, or any flag, this is just an optional. You can consider this is as an optional. So I've just used this flag --production to like when I build the image, I will get some layers like, okay, I'm building this image for my production system. Likewise. So you can even give it a custom name. That is fine. Okay. So once I install all the dependencies, I am going to install these dependencies from my source code as well as my package.json file using this yarn as a package manager. Okay. Once I install this, the next step would be if you see CMD, or we also call it as entry point. Okay. Entry point or CMD. So this is basically inside the container environment when you are going to expose this so that you can test it out on your browser, right? Same thing if I need to explain here, right? So if you see here, once I say npm install, then obviously I have to run this on my environment, right? On your local or your container environment. So you are using npm run command. So whenever you are going to run the application within the container, you are going to use this operation called as CMD. Okay, that is the same what I have to specify the command that should be executed when the container starts. So this is important. We are executing this when the container starts. So whenever you're going to start the container, you have to use this command CMD. You can use CMD or you can also use entry point. Okay. But yeah, in general, you use CMD. But if there are, you have multiple environments, then on that case, sometimes we also use entry point. Okay. So it has high priority over CMD. So in general, you can use CMD, or even if you want, you can use entry point. The case is same only. You can use any of this so that you can expose the application. So same thing what we have done, CMD, and this is going to be an array. If you see node, this is what I am doing, correct? So yeah, in this case, so ideally when you're directly going to deploy this application on your local for this getting started application, so let me scroll up. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Let me again start this over here. Okay. So right now, this is my present working directory. Okay. So where exactly I'm going to expose? I'm going to expose my, uh, I have I already have a file called index.js file, right? That is where we are going to expose our application. This is our expose, that is port 3000. So in the source code src, I have a directory, we call it as src index.js. This is the file, right? Where we have defined like it's going to expose on port 3000. So again, you are going to get this command. Your development team, they will directly give you this command that first you have to run npm install, and then you have to write this command npm run dev, or so what is the command what we have used? It should be npm start, or you can say npm run dev. So if you see, yeah, so they've directly said node src/index.js. So same thing we will mention here, npm, then it should be node/index.js, because this is where we're actually exposing our application port, right? This is where we have the port details. This is port 3000. This is where we are actually exposing our application to test our container environment. So same thing, even this is the command, but since it's a array of commands, we are using this in an array. If you see, this is an array format. So we have two commands, like one is node, then I'm using this separator, and then I'm saying src/index.js. This is how you should expose when you are using CMD as an operation. Okay. So once you execute this command, what else we need? We need the port number where we are exposing the application. So in that case, we will use expose, and then we'll say this is my port number, that is port number 3000. Okay. So this is going to be my Docker file. This is how the Docker file looks like. So let's build this image, then we'll build the container, and then we will again come back to this Docker file. So even if you have any doubt in between in understanding the image, the container, and all these things, so it will be clear for you all. So let me say, okay, I have to SSH again. Let me connect back. Okay, I'll say ls cd getting started. If I do ls, I have my Docker file. You have to make sure that this is the Docker file, right? So if I say Docker file, this is my Docker file. You have to make sure that when you are building the image from this Docker file, you have to execute the build command while being on this present working directory. Okay, where you have the Docker file. So yeah, build the image using the following command. So now if I just come back to this architecture diagram, now I have this Docker file, correct? That means I have already created a Docker file. This is my Docker file, and I can simply again push this to my Docker Hub repository as well. Okay. Once we are good with the Docker file, like once we have tested this on our local, then only we are going to push this in the Docker Hub. Sorry, GitHub repository. So yeah, once you write this Docker file, then as a next step, what we have to do, we have to push this image. Okay, we have to push this image to our Docker Hub repository as well, so that we can maintain our images. Because if you see here, we have different images, right? Different image layers. So similarly, we also have to maintain the same thing in our Docker Hub repository as well. So yeah, the next step would be once we have the Docker file, let's build the image. So I'm just going to execute this commands over here. So it's going to be, this is the command docker build. Okay. Again, I'm running this as a client, and I'm going to request this to my Docker daemon, correct? I'm going to request to Docker daemon that I want to build an image. That is the reason I'm using this docker build command. -t means I'm going to assign a tag for my image, right? So -t stands for tag. I've also explained the same thing here. If you see this definitions, you will be able to explain like what and all things we are doing. So simply, if you see Docker build, I'm going to create so that I can build the image from the Docker file, right? Then I've also explained what these things are. Already, these explanations are available here, so you can read it through. But yeah, once I say Docker build, it's automatically going to clone this image from the Docker Hub repository. Okay, so it's going to clone the Node.js 18 Alpine image. Once it clone the image, it's going to set up this working directory, copy the files. Like the execution will happen one by one. Okay. And if you see Docker build -t, I'm just assigning a tag. I've also given this tag like -t flag we use so that we can assign a tag. Once that is done, this is basically a syntax. You have to understand this is the syntax. Docker build -t. This is going to be image name. What image name you want to give? So in my case, I'm giving getting started. If you want, you can give it any name, any random XYZ. You can say my Node.js image, app image, whatever name you want, you can give it. So this is basically your image name. And if you see this dot, it simply means your present working directory. It means my Docker file is currently available in my current, if I do an ls, it's already available in my present working directory, right? So I can say, uh, yeah, so I can say my Docker file is available in my present working directory. Okay. Now, if I execute this command, so you should see some layers. Like if you see it is building the image, right? From docker.io library, it is going to pull the image, and now it is building all the dependencies. So if you see yarn install, I'm running this yarn install command. It is building, this command is basically building all the packages and the dependencies needed for your application in the application level. Okay. Once that is done, now if you see the last step, right? This is the last step. Then we have directly exposed this port node src index.js. So now what I will do, if I just do an ls, now let's come back to this architecture diagram again. Okay. Now what we did as a client, we have just executed this command docker build command. So when I say docker build, Docker daemon will interact with my client, and it's going to get the Docker file, what we have. It's going to pull the Node.js image, and then it's going to create a container. So the first step is done. Docker pull is already done because Docker pull, we are not doing the things manually. Instead, it's going to pull the image in from this Dockerfile instruction. When I say from node 18, so it's directly going to pull the image. I don't have to manually execute this command. So now I have the OS image, I have the dependencies, I have the source code. Now I can just use this Docker run command. Okay. I can simply run this Docker run command, and I can start my container from the Docker image. So this is my last step. Once I have this Docker file, okay, now from this Docker file, I can directly create my Docker container. Okay. So let's do it. So again, you can use Docker run command. Okay. This is what we call a start the app container. Okay. So if you want to run this image, you can simply use this command. So let me explain as well what this command. Okay. So I'll say, yeah. So if you say Docker run, it means I'm going to spin up a container. Okay. My container name, I'm not defining any container name. If you want, you can also use a flag called hyphen name, and then you can say what container name you want. So I'm not defining any container name. So it's going to automatically, by default, it's going to set up a container name for me. But yeah, the main thing is I'm executing Docker run command. Then if you see this flag -dp, so what does this -dp means? Okay. So when you're actually spinning up a container, you have two options. Either you can use, uh, there are two flags basically. Either you can use hyphen, let me say, yeah. Either you can use -it, okay, or you can use -d, okay. So there are two ways basically how you want to start your application container. So basically, if you say -it, so I'm going to explain this -it as well, maybe in tomorrow's session. That is basically interactive mode. Okay. This is what we call as interactive mode. It means when I'm just direct, when I'm going to hit this, when I'm going to hit the enter, it's directly going to create a container for me, right? So if I use -d means as a detach mode. It means my container is running. Okay. It means my container is running in the background. Or you can simply say it's running in the background. Okay. And if I say interactive mode, it means I'm directly inside the shell, or I can say inside the container shell. So just for the time being, just understand these terms. -it means interactive mode. It means you are going inside the container shell. And if it is -d, then it means you are running the container as a detached mode. It means your container is running in the background. It's not running in the terminal. So let's understand this by an example. Okay. I hope these terms are clear. -it means interactive and -d means detached mode. So let's see this here. So in this case, I am saying -d means my container is running in the detached mode. And P means simply the port number. So if you see like -dp, detached mode, my port number, P for port number, and 3000:3000. It simply means the first 3000, if you see, this is my host port. It means my host port means like it's currently, this port number is currently available in my local, on my local system, right? And I'm going to map this port from my local host port 3000 to this container, my application port 3000. This is my application port, the port what I have defined in my index.js file in the application. So this is what this concept, what we call it as port mapping. We are mapping my port from my local host :3000 to the application port 3000. Okay. And this is what we call it as image name, the same image what we created, right? So if I say Docker images, so I should getting started. This is basically my image name. And this image we have pulled manually using Docker from the Docker Hub. If you remember, I executed this command, right? Docker pull node. So this is where we got this image. Okay. And meantime, while I'm explaining these things, let me also explain. If you want to delete an image, you will use Docker RMI. RMI stands for remove the image. RM means remove and I stands for image. So you are removing this image. So either you can use image ID or you can use the repository name. So I'm going to use this image name. Okay. This is my image name and I'll hit the enter. So it says untag and it deleted. So now if I again say Docker images, I should have only one image. Okay. So you should know how to delete an image as well. Okay, so now if I said Docker images, so I should see this is my image name and this is my image ID. Now let's quickly deploy our application. Okay, so I'm just going to use this command. Now, if you see, it is currently running in the detached mode. That's the reason I'm directly coming into this terminal, right? If you see, I'm directly inside the terminal. But if I have used an -it, then I would have been directly inside the container. So now if I say Docker PS, so again, what is this Docker PS command? Docker PS command we used to check what is the current state of the containers. So if you see, the same command is also here. Run the Docker PS command in the terminal to list your containers. Okay. So if I execute this command, Docker PS command, I can see I have one container. This is my container and it's currently mapped to port 3000. This is the container ID. Okay. This is the image name. This is the image name and Docker entry point.sh. This is the CMD command, which what I have exposed and it's mapped on port 3000 and this is the container name. Okay. So now if I want to test this application whether my application is running, so what I can do, I can just copy this public IP. Okay. And if I just hit :3000, so I should see my application is up and running. Okay. So this is my application. So I can add any items like hello world. It's a very basic level application. I mean, it's just a to-do app application. But yeah, to start the things, it's very good example to actually start how the application code works, how you can create an image, and from image, how you can spin up a container. Okay. So yeah, today we will only cover till this lab one session. There are a lot of other things like the interactive mode. Then uh, there are a few other things related to containers. So there are a few other commands. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Okay. So yep, that's it for today. So any question, guys? Any like in this lab session, whatever we have discussed? If you have any questions, just a sec. Yeah, just give me a sec.